We've been stretching backstage. So I'm Michael McGalley, and again, this is the panel on the future of work. So I love talking to entrepreneurs. It's my favorite thing to do, and I get to talk to three incredible entrepreneurs today about where work is going. So I'm going to do quick introductions. So Cheryl Ingram, Dr. Cheryl Ingram is the founder of two companies, Diverse City LLC and Inclusology. And they both have the same mission, which I'm going to read because I think it's great, which is to eliminate discrimination and oppression in every workplace and educational institution. And so they do it in two ways. Diverse City is on the kind of consulting and services side, working with leading organizations to help them as they address challenges in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then Inclusology is the startup that started just in December, taking a software approach to fulfilling the same mission. Amy Nelson has spent most of her career working as a corporate litigator and presidential fundraiser before leaving it all behind 2 years ago to launch The Riveter. And for anyone who doesn't know, and if you live in Seattle, I would be surprised if you didn't, The Riveter is a female-forward platform for entrepreneurs, freelancers, and everyone in between. They have some of the most inspiring workspaces around with vibrant communities and curated programming and incredible light. LA is opening up on Friday, the first of 3 LA locations, and they have almost 500 members here in Seattle. So very impressive. And then Lauren Goodwin is the founder and CEO of Career Contessa, which she started in 2013 after her personal experience with Gap in career development resources for women. It was obvious to Lauren that this was a resource that was sorely needed, so she created it. And Career Contessa does a number of things. They have e-learning, coaching, and job listings to address the gap. And they also have recently launched a data initiative to provide more transparency in salaries to address the pay gap. Wow. So the first thing I wanted to start, and Lauren, we'll kind of get maybe start on your end. I think some of the best business ideas kind of are born out of personal experience. And I'm just curious, with Career Contessa, sort of what your experiences were that helped you, see something that was missing and that you wanted to create.
Absolutely. I first started by having a job I hated. So if any of you can relate to that, I was working in a very, corporate environment. And I remember I was asked to feed paper through a printer one day. And I was like, there's got to be more to my career than this. I had just graduated. So my first kind of experience with careers was just, what else is there? I had done everything right and graduated, did all the career fairs, this and that, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And at the time, I think careers were really going through a transition of being very traditional. You became a doctor, lawyer, marketing professional, but that was changing. There were social media gurus was now a job title and things like that. So the first experience was just hating my job and becoming more obsessive about what I could do. That ended up landing me a job in recruiting, working for a tech company. And I absolutely loved that job. And that opened up a new can of worms, which was now I was on the other side of the hiring table. So I was looking at resumes, I was watching people interview, I was talking to hiring managers. So both of those experiences. And now I was a woman in a tech company with no female leaders. And I got passed up for a job opportunity. I had been leading the university recruiting team for about 3 years. And then we hired a guy to come in and be my counterpart. And he got promoted over me after being there for 3 months. And that was kind of my first experience of realizing, okay, there's figuring out what you want to do. There's actually getting a job. And then there's navigating your job while you're there and how to be successful. And I didn't have anywhere to turn. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs do this. When it doesn't exist, you decide to create it. And so the creation of Career Contessa really started first with just our interview series to answer, what are jobs and how do you get there? And now we've expanded essentially based off of all the tools I needed. And I figured if I needed them, other women needed them too. And nobody was addressing other issues that just faced women in the workplace. So we've created, I think, a safe place, a place that's going to give you the real story. We're not going to sugarcoat it. But we've also done our best to offer you access to the tools and resources that just didn't exist years ago.
Right. Cheryl, how about you?
Yeah, so I've worked in multiple roles, whether it be in corporate or in nonprofit or in higher education, and I've started to see some of the same trends, right? I've seen human beings face every form of discrimination that you could probably think of in a workplace. And there came this moment in time, there was like this moment of clarity where I had had enough, right? And it was like, I have so much more to offer the world. And here I am working in these different capacities, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in some form, and no one is listening to me. And I was like, how is it? And part of that is related to my identity, right? And so I said, fuck that. I was like, I'm going I said, I'm going to
You
create
can put that on the notebook.
yes. And I'm going to create a space that's built off of all of the things that I've experienced, the good and the bad, right? And bring that into the workplace so that people understand that discrimination is happening. Like I had had enough of facing it and I've had enough of seeing other people face it. And so through that 17 years of experiencing that, I was like, okay, it's time to change the way that people do inclusion, diversity, and equity within the workplace.
Isn't it ironic that you had to leave in order to come back and have them hear you?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, that it's like I had to start my own company for people to say, okay, maybe you do know what it is that you're doing. Come talk to us again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy?
Well, it's interesting, Cheryl, that you bring up that point because my sister and I were talking this morning. My sister and I were both attorneys. I mean, I guess I'll always be an attorney, even though I'm not practicing. You carry that burden with you forever. But my sister said, I applaud what you're doing with the Riveter, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of power in staying in corporate America and fighting the fight there. And I was like, well, I just wanted to throw a hand grenade into it after spending so many years trying to fight within the system. But, for me, I worked on Wall Street for a long time and for many years very much felt like I succeeded in spaces built by men. I was a corporate litigator. I was rising through the ranks at a white shoe law firm in New York. But just because I was succeeding didn't mean there was equity. And it took me a long time to understand that because when I would look up, even though half of law school graduates were women and have been for decades, still, even today, only 16% of corporate law firm partners are women. And so that's not, something's missing there. There's a big gap. And for me, the inequity in the workplace really hit me when I became a mother. I have 3 little girls who are 3, 2, and 9 months. And I felt very much that when I became a parent, I was immediately discounted in the workplace. I think women are much more discounted than men in the workplace when they're parents. I think that wherever you're working during your childbearing years, if you're a woman, you're looked at differently during the work and looked at differently in the workplace. And I was passed over for a promotion. And I asked myself a lot of questions about what I wanted to do. And I was reading Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and I read a statistic that jumped out at me, and it really just stayed with me, that 43% of highly trained professional women off-ramp after they have kids. And if that's a fact, which it is, something is really broken. And what do we do to fix it? And the answer for me was to go to where many of those women were going who were leaving corporate America, which is they were starting businesses. And they're out there starting businesses, but there was no platform for women. If you looked at the traditional co-working options, all of the leaders in that industry are companies that were founded by men, built by men, run by men, and there are no women on their corporate boards. So the Riveter just asked the question, what does the future of work look like if it's built by women? And that's what we're trying to answer.
That's great. I think one of the things that's so interesting about, sort of being on the inside and then taking that leap to be on the outside is all of a sudden you're the boss. And can we talk? I want to hear about how these experiences have impacted, obviously you guys are going to be much more intentional about the cultures that you're building. How have you thought about that as you're building, your 2 companies, let's say?
I think one of the things that really has resonated with me and always sticks out is authenticity, right? And that means that when I'm working in these spaces and being the boss, I have this privilege of being able to show up and be authentic, even though I'm facing bias, right? Because there is no privilege without oppression in some way, shape, or form. And so to show up and have that voice to be able to speak out, I always want to make sure that I am always authentic in what it is that I say, because I've existed in spaces for too long where that hasn't happened, right? And I've had to cover my personality and who I am the best that I can in order to survive. And so it's been really important for me in building my businesses to be authentic to what it is that I believe, because of the presence of imposter syndrome that has been encased in me through the issues that I have faced working in different spaces, and could still be very relevant today because working in my own business and owning it doesn't stop me from taking those sharp cuts every day when I am dealing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it gives me a little bit more freedom to tell someone about themselves and what it is that they should be doing without facing that immediate repercussion of being fired, right? Or taking that risk that says, I'll just move on to another client if you can't handle what it is that I'm saying to you, but never not saying what it is that people need to hear in that moment.
For me, this is a really big struggle that I'm having. I think, I've realized a lot about what my upbringing in a very masculine field brings to the leadership table. I think I have a masculine style of leadership because it was what I learned. So it's something I'm having to relearn. Um, Also, I'm building a startup. We closed a $5 million Series Seed. We are competing in an arena that is very, it's full of a lot of people. And, we have a lot of expectations because we're backed by a venture capital firm. And so we have to grow. And you sign up to grow a certain way when you sign up to raise venture capital money. And that involves a lot of time and a lot of energy. And so for me, it's striking the balance between we have a big job to do and we have to do it really well and we have one shot to do it versus I know that we need to live our lives. I mean, I had a baby last August, right? I'm in the middle of it. And so we, at the Riveter, I was very intentional in that we have 16 weeks parental leave and we have unlimited vacation as long as you get your job done. Because I think those are things you can do, right? Those are small steps that corporations can take. And if we're taking that from day one, that's one part of the culture that I can dictate as the leader and try to show that you can succeed with those kind of benefits.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things I've learned as a leader in my leadership style is very collaborative. And what I noticed early on is I never had a boss before where they would work with me. It's like I would do all the hard work and then they would present the idea to their boss, right? And so I was always managing up. And so when I first started hiring people at Career Contessa, I started to emulate that. And what I realized is that that wasn't going to keep smart, brilliant people working at Career Contessa if I was letting them do all the work. And then for the final leg, I was running with them or without them to the client to finish it. And so I've developed a more collaborative leadership style where I see my job now is to fully support them and let them come up with great ideas, run with it. We're a startup too, so it's sort of always fair game to test something, throw it on the wall. If it sticks, great. If not, embrace failure. What I learned from the startup that I worked at before was to embrace failure, move fast. What I didn't learn was how to be collaborative and not make it a competition so that people do feel like they can speak up at meetings and that just building confidence. And I think that's really important, especially when you're running a female company, is to constantly be providing ways for them to be inspired and motivated and confident. And that's not something I had experienced before. So it's really important for me to bring that to our organization. Not to mention we're a career site for women. So if we are talking about these things and we're not doing them ourselves, we are complete hypocrites. So I think as far as the benefits or how we run our company in terms of paid time off, unlimited vacation, flexibility, we talk about that all the time. And so we're sort of lucky that it's never like, oh, you want to work from home. It's never a foreign concept that we have that at our company because it's our job basically.
I think that one of the things that, there's this shift happening, right, in work. And I talk a lot about, in my own work about moving from, how do we create work, not jobs? I think a lot of the time we're creating, we're so focused on jobs, and it's the talking point, but really we need to be giving people work is the primary thing. How do you think that, and there's a Peter Drucker quote, the management guru Peter Drucker, about, that all knowledge workers are volunteers, but we train managers to manage conscripts. How do you think, and Amy, maybe we'll start with you since you guys are seeing this in the Riveter every day. How do you think what is that shift? How do you characterize that shift and the relationship between being an employee and being an independent, sort of worker?
I mean, I think it's largely characterized by who you're working with. I think something that we try to foster in my team, and I think about this a lot because as an attorney, I literally worked in increments of time, right? I billed every 6 minutes. So my life was it was punching a clock, right? It was it was a professional job, but I was punching a clock. And now I'm not, right? What I do bleeds into every part of my life. I think about it all the time. And I want to create an environment where the people that I work with feel the same way. I want them to have lives. They don't need to think about it as much as I do. But I do want them also to have it be, not a job, right? It's a career. I think one thing I can offer is like this incredible opportunity to grow and to build a network and to have this platform. And I think to do that, it is about taking people's ideas to heart and giving them agency with their ideas. Because to Lauren's point, you could just say, do the work for me, I'll take it and run. But it's the questions of like, what is your idea? Develop your idea, throw it on the wall, see if it works. And I think it's an interesting question because so many women are facing that pivot from being in a job to starting their own business. And how do you build boundaries around it? How do you dictate it? And I think it does have a lot to do with the people you're working around. And even if you are by yourself, who you're in a room with, right? Because that impacts what you're doing too.
Right.
I would just agree with that. I think more and more people are hiring workers and not for jobs. We used to get fancy job titles and benefits, and you would stay at a company forever. And it's not that way for employers or employees anymore.
Yeah. It's really, for me, I had my own business for 10 years, and then I was at Microsoft for 5 years. And now for the last 3 years, I've been out as an entrepreneur again. I really feel like I've sort of whipsawed in this, and while I'm out, I'm also doing consulting for Microsoft still. So it's kind of, still a place in there. How about you, Cheryl, for your clients? Do you think that this is something that people understand and are equipped to deal with?
None of my clients are in their crowd, all right?
This is a safe place.
This question really scares me, and I'll be very honest about that. And the reason being is because for me, when I go into workplaces, I have to break down the culture and then recreate it so that whether employees show up for work or a job, they are empowered enough to be their best selves in those spaces, right? And so the question, when I think about the future of work and how it relates to a person being an employee in work, the one thing that comes to mind is, damn, I'm just trying to create a space where they can actually do that equitably, right? And for some people, even to get into the door equitably. And so I'm worried about the fact that, I go into companies daily and see just how inequitable these spaces are, whether you're a woman, a man, a non-gender binary. There are different privileges that exist, especially depending on your intersections as well as oppressions. And so I'm more concerned with the fact that, like Amy said, who you work with. I'm also like, where is it that you work? Mm-hmm. Right? And people create those spaces. And so it just concerns me about whether or not an employee can just show up and be their best selves at work. And what do they need to do that? And our companies providing it or hindering it?
Mm-hmm. But what you're seeing is that they're bringing you in because they understand that they have to address that.
Right. They bring me in because they are understanding they have to address it. And usually when I go into companies, they're growing, right? So they're like, we need to hire all of these people. But then again, we have an issue with retention because our culture is not equitable for these people to show up and be their best self. So they leave, right? And so you see this revolving issue of exclusion happening.
Right. People break down the door and then they break down the door to get out.
That's right.
What do you think? I'll go with you, Lauren, first, with Career Contessa. When you guys are thinking about, you're trying to create a future, and what is the future of work that you feel like you want to see and that you're pursuing in the work you're doing?
For us, I think it's definitely having people be in the driver's seat of their careers. Oftentimes I think about the fact that people show up to work and then they let their manager dictate what projects they work on, when they get promoted, if they stay at the company or not. And so what I think is the future of work is really people having a lot more information and transparency around the options that exist today in the workplace, whether you want to go to Microsoft, start your own company and go back to Microsoft. Like, we need to have more information around how people are doing that and allowing people to be in the driver's seat of their careers. And I also see the future of work not being stereotyped by words like career transitions and gig economy entrepreneur, like we're all just workers. And whether you worked in social media, now you want to work in finance, or you're a lawyer and you want to be an entrepreneur and start a company, the biggest question we get at Career Contessa is, how do I transition careers? And so I really hope the future of work is recognizing that these differences are super great, and all companies should be embracing kind of the fact that people might not have this traditional background.
Mhm. So it's a more fluid environment.
More fluid, and also you're the one directing it versus saying, I'm applying for this job, please hire me. It should be like, I want this job, and here's why I want the job and why I'm excited about the company. So you are very, I think, much more concrete around like what it is you're doing and why. Oftentimes I feel like people apply for jobs, and we have a saying in recruiting where you spray and pray. You spray your resume everywhere and you pray that someone will pick it up. I don't think it's not working right now, and I don't think it's gonna work in the future.
Mm-hmm. How about for you, Amy? I think that you sort of see it on both sides. I mean, you have places where people are living the future of work today, and then you also have your existence as a company.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think what I'm really focused on is equity of opportunity, and I'm looking at it through a gender lens in my specific work. I mentioned the statistic of half of women off ramping after they have kids, and there are so many other statistics that we all know. Like there are 24 female CEOs of Fortune 500 companies this year. There are more CEOs named John of Fortune 500 companies than there are women. That's a true fact. And I want that to change. I think it's patently ridiculous. I hate it. It doesn't reflect our, ambition, our intelligence, and any of that. And what does it take to change that? I think it takes working on it from the outside, like we are in creating spaces for women to grow companies. I think it takes women building big scalable companies like the Riveter is doing. I didn't think at the beginning that the Riveter would be a venture scale company. And I think that is really because I didn't see other women doing it. When you look at the big companies like Facebook and Uber and all of the unicorns, I think only 14 unicorns have been started by women, and only a couple by women alone, mostly with male co-founders. And those things matter. Women last year in this country received 2% of venture capital funding. In Washington State, it was worse. It was 1%. And we just have to work on the equity piece of it. And it takes leading by example and bringing people with you, right? It's important to amplify each other's voices because no one will do it for us.
Cheryl?
I think that the future of the workforce is changing in itself. The face of the workforce and the way our population is going is starting to change. And I think that companies are starting to recognize that and want to keep up, but they don't know how. Right. So I think that we're starting to have more conversations, even though we don't need more conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need more action. Mm-hmm. And we have less of that and more people talking about it. And it's starting to become cliche, which is making the workplace feel like it's inclusive, but it's not as inclusive as it should be for diverse populations. And so my hope is that there's a workplace without discrimination and oppression, right? That's what I'm aiming for. It's the thing that I keep saying I'm going to solve. It's an inherited responsibility. And when I walk into a workplace someday before, I expire, I hope that that it is equitable and that there is no more discrimination. And so that's what I'm fighting for. That's what it is I want to see. And that's what I'm going to remain hopeful for, especially as the demographics in our population starts to change. And that will soon impact our workforce, if not already.
So we have a minute and 30 seconds left. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I'm curious, so they are going to be the ones who are working in this workplace of the future. I'm curious what advice you'd give them. Maybe Cheryl, starting with you.
I'm going to go last.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Lauren, starting with you.
Let me think on that.
Okay. I would encourage them to take risk and do things outside of their comfort zone. Honestly, it's the only time that I've grown in life is when I have taken risks and done stuff that I didn't ever see myself doing, like becoming a recruiter or launching a company. So take risk.
I have a very specific piece of advice, which someone gave to me when I was young, which was to learn to ask for money. I know that sounds strange, but I learned to be a political fundraiser, and learning to ask for money for causes that I believed in translated across my life in many, many ways. I learned to ask for what I wanted. I learned to shut up and wait for an answer. I learned that no today is not no tomorrow. And that's the advice I most want to impart to my daughters, because I think it teaches them a very powerful skill. So I think that's something that all young people should learn.
I would say learn to be an ally and an advocate, and then show up and do both.
Mhm. So not putting yourself first.
So you said not
Not-
putting
yeah,
yourself first?
An ally and an advocate.
Yeah, I think that in an ally and in advocacy, there is already self embedded in it, right? Especially if you are an advocate, you're usually a member of the group that relates to your identity versus an ally. It's where you usually don't identify with that group, but you want to help, right? And I think both of those are forms of self in some way, shape, or form when you think about advocacy. So I think that that's just prevalent. It's automatically in there. It should be.
Right. Great. Well, we got it right on the nose. Thank you so much.